Thank you, Secretary Wright, for being here.
Thanks for having me, David.
Before we begin, I just want to note at the very top of the day that I made a note to the audience that we were here to engage in respectful dialogue. And I just want to reiterate that. There was a lot of cheering for the last session, and I know emotions are high. You may not agree with everything you hear during this conversation, but I ask everyone to really allow us to have the space to have a respectful and honest dialogue. With that, let us begin.
Let's go.
Secretary Wright, President Trump, on his first day in office, declared the nation's first national energy emergency. At the time, he and yourself started calling for an all-of-the-above energy strategy. Since then, we've seen the administration put its finger on the scales, many would say, of certain industries. The president himself has said he's no longer going to approve new wind or solar projects. The administration, the Energy Department, has gone out of its way to actually stop certain wind development projects, one of which was 80% complete off the coast of Rhode Island. So at a moment of rising energy demand, why is it good for the American people to take energy sources off the grid and say we are not allowing certain types of energy that the market wants to come online?
Well, neither are true. We're not taking any energy sources off the grid. We did have an effort to end subsidies. The wind subsidies and solar subsidies are 33 years old. So it's about time for industries to walk on their own. We do have studies and dialogues going on right now with the offshore wind developers. No final decisions have been made on that. There are serious issues on both sides there. And I'll say as a lifelong energy guy, I've never been an all-of-the-above energy person. I've always said I'm for affordable, reliable, secure energy that betters human lives. So if you do things to your energy system that make it more expensive and less reliable, I'm not for that.
Okay, so let's just take it one beat at a time.
Yes.
When the president comes out and says no new permitting for solar and wind, I've talked to business executives who say, like, this is madness, right? The government shouldn't be picking winners and losers. How is it a good energy strategy for the United States of America if there are companies that want to buy this, if there are the communities that want to install solar or wind projects, for the Washington to say they can't do that?
He's talking about policies on federal lands. There is massive and growing opposition across the country to wind power and for farmers for solar power. People on private lands are going to do what they want. Solar energy will continue to be developed. I'm cheering it on. I'm not against solar energy by any stretch. I'm against things that are subsidized and that are forced. And of course, I was in the oil and gas business. Last 4 years, they did everything possible to stop oil and gas development in the United States. Oil and gas are 73% of U.S. energy. Wind, solar, and batteries are 3%. So the impact on prices for Americans, that's why President Trump got elected, right? Because the Biden administration tried to stop the energy that powers our country. 82% when he was inaugurated, 82% when he left office. But he stood in the way so many different ways. What was the net result of that? Harder to produce, riskier to produce, higher prices. My company was record profitability. 1% of Americans won that were in the oil and gas business. 100% of Americans that live on oil and gas lost. So President Trump's thing was to lower the cost of energy, make it easier to develop things and build things in our country.
We'll come back to energy prices, but I want to stick on this issue of subsidies for a moment. You talk about taking away subsidies from the renewable business. The oil and gas business, I don't need to tell you as someone who's worked in that industry, also enjoys enormous subsidies.
What are they?
I mean, are you saying there's no oil and gas subsidies?
There are not oil and gas subsidies. There are not oil and gas subsidies. There's a thing called you can rapidly expense your drilling costs, which you can for all manufacturing.
I mean, we're talking about tax credits at this point, which is the way in which most of these renewable energy products.
That's more rapid expensing. Oil and gas pays a higher percent of their book income in taxes to the U.S. government, except for banking and pharmaceutical. So it's not a subsidized industry. Globally, lots of low-income countries subsidize the price of gasoline because it's politically popular to make energy more affordable for people. So there's consumer-based subsidies outside of our country. In the United States, the oil and gas and coal are huge taxpayers and don't have any subsidies that I'm aware of, and I've been in the business for 40 years. So if you can find the subsidies, tell me where they are. What are they?
Okay, we'll come back to that as well, perhaps. On the issue of wind, you brought up the issue that you're looking into this issue around potential national security concerns. I don't think you invoked that term on this stage yet, but when Revolution Wind received that stop work order last month, that was part of the explanation, that there were national security concerns. A judge this Monday allowed that project to start moving forward again. Can you help us understand what are these national security concerns, which were not particularly well specified, that are so concerning that you're willing to say a project that is 80% complete, that has thousands of people working, jobs in the field on this day, needs to be stopped in its tracks?
Look, there's huge opposition to that. Among the fishermen, the fisheries in those waters, you've seen right whales washing up on beaches from offshore.
The research, though, does not show a direct correlation between wind turbines and right whales.
We don't know that. Well, pile driving is quite disturbing. We don't know these trade-offs, but believe me, there are very passionate opposition to this, and there are passionate supporters of it. There's a dialogue going on right now. You'll see something worked out.
Okay, well, that's news if that's so. I mean, is that to suggest that the administration is going to allow Revolution Wind to continue and stop trying to block this project?
I said we're trying to balance both sides of that parties, and some resolution will come of that.
Yeah. But on this, I mean, what you just said, some people are opposed to it. Some people are opposed to everything. That's the reality of living in a big country like this. I think the question is, when the administration comes out and says there's national security concerns, that gets people's attention. What are those national security concerns?
You want to bring a swarm of drones into the coastal United States? Fly through an offshore wind farm. You will not be able to be seen in radar. These are.
Have we tested this? Is this true? I just don't know. That's a new one to me.
Think of the wind turbines are almost as tall as the Empire State Building, and there's tons of them. It has a navigation impact, but maybe they can be dealt with. I'm not drawing any conclusions on that, but there are serious issues.
Can you help us understand the more general opposition this administration seems to have to wind? And because this was not the first offshore wind project that's been targeted. There was one in Idaho. There was one here in New York, though it was ultimately allowed to proceed. Once, perhaps or not, there was a quid pro quo with a natural gas line that was allowed to be built by the governor. And there's paperwork that suggests a wind farm in Maryland may be targeted next. Why is it that the administration has focused in on this one industry as a real focus for it?
I'd say two reasons. One is if you travel rural America, maybe not so common for New Yorkers, if you travel rural America, that people live in the areas of wind development, the opposition among rural folk to wind development has reached a fever pitch. 500 projects have been canceled. Counties are banning wind all across the country. Wind is the opposite of oil and gas. People that live near wind farms don't like them. People that live far away love them. Oil and gas development, people that live in oil fields love it. People that live far away hate it. So in North Dakota, where I lived in Colorado, the people that live near oil and gas development it's quite different levels of opposition there. Maybe the bigger reason is who have been the leaders in offshore wind development? Denmark, Germany, United Kingdom.
I just had Scott Strazik up here on stage. That's a United States company. And he was very measured in his remarks. But what you could hear is that this is the CEO of a publicly traded company whose business, a major part of his business, is suffering because of this administration's attacks on this very industry that he's a major part of. What's your response to him?
That there are serious issues and discussions that are ongoing will continue. The leaders in offshore wind development are also the leaders in the most expensive electricity in the world. Denmark, United Kingdom, and Germany, 3 of the top 7 most expensive electricity in the world. California, by far the most expensive electricity in the continental United States, big wind and solar developer. So what President Trump got elected was we saw a 25% rise in electricity prices during the Biden presidency, hardly any growth in our electricity production, shutting down coal plants and natural gas plants across the country. That's a way to make energy prices more expensive and to prevent the United States from leading in AI or reindustrialize our nation. Trying to bring back common sense.
Okay. I just want to address from a personal perspective something you just said about New Yorkers not getting. One of the privileges that I have as a New York Times climate reporter is I get to travel all over the country. And I just want to note that I've met farmers who are opposed to wind. I've talked to them. I've written stories about them. I've written stories about farmers who are thrilled to have wind turbines on their property. And same thing with fossil fuel developments. I've been to communities where fossil fuels are a major and important part of the community and enjoy widespread support. I've also been to communities where fossil fuel production has devastated local communities with environmental pollution. So I just encourage all of us to recognize that there's nuance in all of this.
Trade-offs in everything. That's what life's about. I agree with that. David, I agree with that.
Can you help us understand your perspective on renewables growth? In statement after statement, you take a much dimmer view on the growth of renewable energy, specifically solar, than almost every other organization that is really doing the work to track this, whether that's investment banks, my friends at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. They send me reports every day that show an upward and to the right trajectory for renewables growth around the world and potentially in the United States. Other governments are betting on that. China is producing incredibly cheap solar panels that they're exporting to the globe. You, however, suggest that solar growth is going to be limited. Why is this perspective of yours so sort of out of step with what we're seeing with the consensus from the McKinseys and the Goldman Sachs of the world?
That's a great question. So I worked on solar energy in graduate school, and I bought thousands of solar powers to power remote instruments all around the world.
Okay.
I'm a believer in
solar was a lot different back then, let's acknowledge.
Of course, it's continued to get better. I'm a supporter of solar, and it has a future. But today it's 1.2% of global energy. Here's why I've been critical of solar energy and wind and batteries, which are not worthless, but we've spent $5 trillion of them in the name of fighting climate change, and they're 2.6% of total global energy. And as I said, everywhere high penetration, more expensive prices. The developing world is not going to follow a model of making it expensive so manufacturing industries leave your country. United Kingdom and Germany, major industrial powers, all their factories went to Asia, where they're now powered by coal instead of natural gas. That's not a policy others are going to follow. The problem with solar energy, the panels get cheaper, but they're not a meaningful part of the cost of solar energy. The problem with solar energy, it takes a lot of land. You have to run extra transmission lines. You got to build infrastructure to bring that solar energy to the grid. And then you have to have power when the sun goes behind a cloud and when the sun sets, which it does almost every night. So they provide an energy source that there's not a customer for. If your kid goes into an incubator, or you're in an elevator, electricity has to be on 24/7 at all times. So the electricity grid doesn't just collect electrons and store them somewhere. It has to match supply and demand at every second. And when you design a grid, what matters is peak demand. You got to have a system that can hit at peak demand. When we had peak demand in PJM, where we are now, 65 million people in this region, it was actually inauguration night, super cold, peak demand, wind, solar, and batteries were a little over 2% of the energy on our grid. When it's in the middle of the night and weather systems are moving in, there's lots of wind power. But we have plenty of capacity then. It just means you burn a little bit less gas. You save 2 cents a kilowatt to not burn that gas, and we give 4 cents a subsidy and 10 cents other. So they raised the system cost of electricity. If they could deliver reliably at peak demand times, they'd be value added.
I hear you, and I think there's much of what you said is grounded in fact. I can't fact check every single thing you said, but I want to acknowledge, yes, of course, solar is not generating electrons that go directly into the grid that can power things when the sun's not shining. No one's disputing that. I guess my original question was, though, why is your assessment, your outlook for solar so much different than what we're seeing from the investment banks, the major corporations? How do you explain that delta between what you're saying and what the consensus view in corporate America and the international community is?
Look, I was in corporate America, but corporate America wants to sell businesses, raise money. There's big business in solar. There'll continue to be. But people have simplified views of energy that have been destructive. California kept putting on more cheap energy, and its electricity prices kept getting more expensive. California had electricity prices only about 10% higher than Florida's 20 years ago. And then they went different directions. Florida said, what's the cheapest source of electricity? Natural gas. They grew their natural gas plant capacity. California said, we're going to shut down as many of our natural gas plants as we can. Still their largest source of electricity by far, followed by another category called imported from other states. They put on a lot of wind and solar. Today, California's electricity prices are twice Florida's. And think of this, California produces less electricity than Florida produces.
Yeah.
And they have the highest adjusted poverty rate in the nation. So you and I are not hurt by a little bit more expensive utility bills. But if you're blue collar, you're working class, that hurts your quality of life. And blue collar jobs tend to be more energy intensive jobs. No one manufactures anything in California anymore. It's all moved to other states or overseas. That's just not a pathway we want to follow.
Okay. I think there's multiple points of entry into the conversation, but I do want to keep moving on. Briefly, though, the head of ERCOT, the Texas energy regulator, just yesterday, I believe, said that they had no brownouts this summer, and he attributed that success in large measure to renewables, particularly wind, solar, and batteries. What do you tell him when he says, why is this administration waging war on renewables when they're literally the things that are keeping the lights on for Texans?
Well, they aren't, but
that's not what ERCOT says.
They're building tons of solar and wind in Texas. That's all going ahead. But here's the story about Texas. Among the southern states, most expensive electricity. Southern states in general, because they've had more sensible governance, have lower electricity prices than northern states, but it doesn't stand out among its neighbors. And also, Texas has the fastest rising wholesale electricity prices of any region in the country. 100% rise in wholesale prices from the start of the Biden administration to today. Those are not fully reflected in retail rates yet. We'll do everything we can to try to mute that rise. But electricity is about system cost. When people tell me solar is cheap or wind is cheap, it's how does it affect the cost to run the system? If they make electricity prices come down, I'm all in on them.
Okay, what about coal? Coal is recognized as one of the dirtiest fossil fuels, not just from a climate perspective, but from an environmental health perspective. We've known for 100 years more now that it's a real hazard to human health. This administration is trying to promote the coal industry again, trying to keep existing plants online. You have posted social media posts promoting the coal business. It's also expensive. We're hearing from regulators. They're on the record saying this is going to cost additional money. It's going to raise rates for ratepayers to keep these coal plants online. How does something like coal fit into the strategy you're articulating here?
Again, two great questions. So first of all, my whole thing, people tell me coal is dirty. Well, compared to gas or nuclear, it is. It does have air quality things in addition to greenhouse gases. But 2 billion people in the world today burn wood to heat their homes and cook their meals. 2 million preventable deaths from those things. So coal's dirty compared to what? Not compared to that energy form.
Well, compared to solar and wind.
Well, but it provides electricity that people want 24/7. But here's the story of coal. So coal is the largest source of electricity globally for 125 years, and it will be for decades more. Its lead over natural gas is pretty large on a global scale. In the United States, it got outcompeted by cheap pipeline-delivered natural gas. It went from over 50% of electricity. Today, it's only 15, 16%. So it shrunk a lot. That's the biggest driver of the reduction in U.S. greenhouse gas emissions and the cleaning of our air. You're right. There's particulate matter, SOx, NOx from coal burning. So it's not as good as solar or nuclear. So has greater air impacts than solar or wind. That's all true. The problem is we are start of an AI race. We want to reindustrialize our country, and people are upset about rising electricity prices. How do you drive up electricity prices? Is you shut down stuff that's working today that can provide electricity at peak demand times. And so you won't see a lot of coal plants built. You probably won't see any new coal plants because they can't compete with natural gas. But we still get 15, 16% of our electricity that's core to our country today from that. If we shut those plants down, that's just, as Biden administration was doing, that just further drives up electricity prices. And to the specific comment you made, I used emergency powers to keep open a 1.5 gigawatt Campbell power plant in southwest Michigan. I took a lot of heat from that, including from the New York Times. They don't need that plant. There was a commitment to close it. 15 years before its end of life, 2 days later, there was a brownout in MISO, the Midwest Independent System Operator. That would have been a blackout without 1.5 gigawatts from that coal plant. Then people said, because they published it, it cost them $29 million to run that coal plant, for that next 6 weeks. It did. But what wasn't reported in the article was they collected $30+ million in revenue. The difference is the profit. Every business has costs. Every business has revenue. So if you can prevent a blackout and prevent electricity prices from going up, I'm all in to do that. So I think this administration's policy is going to be to stop the closure of coal plants, most of them cooperatively working with utilities. Half of them are calling me saying, can you help us? We made agreements with our governors. Politically, we're closing these plants. We don't have backup systems that are going to provide reliable power. There's 120-year-old coal plants that are uneconomic today. Those will close. We're not going to not close any coal plants, but we're trying to protect the American consumers to have affordable electricity. and we want data centers to be able to locate here. We want semiconductor manufacturing to come back here. We want aluminum and steel production to come back to the United States. That takes energy.
Okay. In July, the Energy Department published a report that it said documented the effects of greenhouse gas emissions on the U.S. climate. You handpicked 5 scientists to commission this report. They worked in secret for the most part. And this report, when it came out, was immediately denounced by a large group of scientists, 85 on the first day, I think, including by the authors of the studies that were cited in this report. Then just last week, the National Academies of Science issued a sharp rebuttal. And so this is the real question. I don't want to get into the details of what was in that report. But given the intensity of the pushback to that report, why should the American people trust that document?
Great question. First of all, I'd say read it. I don't. Have you read the report?
Yes. But that's not my question.
So, no, I'm just asking.
Again, there's this delta between what you're saying and what the consensus scientific view is.
Be careful of mixing consensus and scientific. The people that speak up and
there is a scientific consensus, which is to say the vast majority
of... These are activists. No, these are the people that are politically involved in this issue are the ones that speak up. First of all, 90% of what's in our climate report is straight from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Straight from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's just in a format that's easier accessible, easier for people to read. The National Academies, wrote a report, all sorts of strong condemnations of the thing. Read their report. They only discussed one quantitative thing that was in our report. We reported that sea level rise had risen 8 inches from the year 1900 to last year, 124 years. We reported 8 inches of sea level rise, and in the National Academy of Sciences report, they said it was 7 inches.
Okay.
So they had a 1 inch lower sea level rise than us. Nothing in our report on the data on weather, on extreme weather, on greening of the planet, nothing substantive in the report did they object to or say was incorrect. They just didn't like that the conclusion of our report was climate change is a real physical phenomenon that's unfolding. It's just not the crisis it's often sold to be. That's the part that people didn't like. But they didn't disagree with any of the data or any of the facts that was put in there to support that conclusion.
So let's stick on this statement that you just made, that they are activists, because I think that's a really strong statement that you're making about groups like the IPCC, about, I don't know, I mean, choose the National Academies of Science. Is it your opinion, that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I really just want to understand, do you feel like the broad scientific community that has developed a consensus, let's acknowledge, that climate change is creating real destructive effects for the communities in the United States, internationally, that global temperatures are rising fast, that we can attribute severe weather events to these rising temperatures? Are you saying that they're sort of like in cahoots and shouldn't be trusted?
No, I said the ones that speak out in condemning these reports are the scientists. They're the ones that get on the media because they're angry and they want to make strong political conclusions. There's nothing different in the science in our report and in the science in the IPCC reports or even in the National Academy report. The difference is in the National Academy report, they said models show something terrible might happen in 50 years. These crazy convoluted links that like infectious diseases are going to be impacted by 1 degree of temperature rise over a century. You know, these are, most of the people working in climate science are good, honest, hardworking scientists. I've toured the universities, I engage and speak with them. People that are doing climate science are just reasonable scientists. Their conclusions are not this alarmist crisis thing. And you said making weather more extreme, more hurricanes, more intense hurricanes. That's not what's in the IPCC reports. That's not what's in the data. That's what the media says. That's what activists say. That's what politicians says. That's actually not in the data.
There's a ton of attribution science, though. And are you saying that the studies that are showing attribution science, I mean, that do the actual scientific work to link global temperature rise to specific weather events, are you saying that's not to be trusted?
The attribution science is not science. You can't draw a long-term slow trend to an event. Weather events, tornadoes, hurricanes, or whatever, extremely complicated phenomenon. So yeah, attribution science, that's people reaching for something. Because the problem is, if that was true, we would see an increase. Accumulated cyclonic energy is the way you sum up all the hurricanes, their length, their size, their magnitude across the whole planet. We would see a rise in accumulated cyclonic energy. We haven't. We would see a rise in landfalling hurricanes in the United States. We haven't. We haven't seen landfalling hurricanes in the Caribbean. There's a 500-year record of landfalling hurricanes. So Roger Pilkey Jr., the world's leader on extreme weather, a longtime IPCC author, professor at CU Boulder, he's been criticized and attacked for just publishing the data. So this is an example of the politics. Most people are not in some grand conspiracy, but if you're honest and sober about climate change, to politicians, to media, that's a bit of a threat. It kind of gets in the way of a political movement.
Speaking of political movements, on the first day of this administration, President Trump, as well as declaring a national energy emergency, pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement. You've called the Paris Climate Agreement silly. And I guess my question here is, would you like to see other countries follow the United States' lead and also withdraw from Paris?
Oh, that's their choice, but absolutely, absolutely. Look, this has become a club of people that have lost sight of the interests of their own people. There's also, and I encourage everyone to read it, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change also writes economic reports where they try to estimate, of course, a very hard thing to do, what are the economic damages for climate change with different rise in temperature scenarios? What are the impacts? Current rate of temperature rise it's going on globally. If you extrapolate to the year 2100, the range of economic impacts predicted in the IPCC consensus economics, meaning averaging everyone's economics work, is somewhere between 0.2% and maybe 3 or 4% reduction in per capita income at the end of the century. This is in a world that's projected to be 4 times richer. So is it a crisis that our great-grandchildren, might be 385% richer than us and not 400% richer than us? But yet, offsetting that, today we have 2 million people dying because they don't have clean cooking fuels in Africa and in South Asia. And the IPCC got 19 nations to pledge we will not lend for hydrocarbon development in the developing world. They don't want those people to get clean cooking stoves. It's so far off track. To a credible group that's going to study climate change, it's a real issue. We should not ignore it. We should engage with it, but in a thoughtful way and evaluate trade-offs. But impoverishing poor people today, so we'll have a few hundredths or a tenth of a degree cooler world at the end of the century, to me is not just wrong economically, it's immoral.
I want to talk about U.S. competitiveness, and I'm aware that we are fast running out of time, and I have about 42 more questions left for you.
I'll be faster answers.
Okay. Talk to me about China. We've been writing all year about the different energy pathways between the United States and China. We've been talking about it on stage today. The United States, under your leadership, is pursuing a fossil fuel strategy. China is leaning in to renewables, specifically solar, batteries, EVs. The list goes on. Does that concern you at all from a geostrategic competitiveness standpoint? Many people we've talked to, independent experts, Republicans as well, say the United States is at risk of losing economic advantage in the decades ahead, as well as some of the soft power. I mean, you talk about what's happening in bringing energy access to the developing world. We had a panel about it earlier today. A lot of that work is happening with cheap solar panels made in China. The United States is not participating in some of those conversations right now. Are you at all concerned that the United States is losing a step on this front?
I am not. I do want to engage with Africa again. The U.S. broadly has pulled back from Africa. China's gone in and filled that vacuum for minerals, for energy, for influence in the continent of Africa. My lifelong passion is how to better energize Africa and lift people up. We're going to do that in this administration, and I do want to get back in that playing field. But look, don't listen to what the headlines are about China. China gets 87% of its energy from hydrocarbons. The world as a whole, 84, and we're at 82. So they have a more hydrocarbon-dependent economy than we do. Wind, solar, and batteries, they spend a lot of money on it, but 4% of their energy, and they've also got blocks full of 40-story empty apartment buildings. I don't want to copy that.
That's a different issue.
I don't want to copy that. And China is an aggressive developer of coal plants today. They built about 100 coal plants last year, have about 100 under construction right now. We have 0 in the United States. If you guys, and I'm going to suggest you might 5 years from now give President Trump the Hero of the Climate Award, because in the Trump administration, you will see more downward movement in greenhouse gas emissions globally and in the United States than in any other leader in history. Because what is his focus on? It's on the growth of natural gas and the growth of nuclear. These are the 2 needle movers that can move decarbonization in the world. 2.5% from wind and solar. They're only in the electricity sector. That's just one sector of the energy economy. That does not move the needle on greenhouse gas emissions. So if it's about lowering greenhouse gas emissions, Trump is your man.
I'm glad. No. Please no. I'm glad you brought it back to President Trump.
Those just the facts.
He came to office saying he was going to cut energy prices in half in 12 to 18 months, as on the record during the campaign. Is that going to happen?
He's ambitious, and he wants to drive prices down as much as he can. Gasoline prices, adjusted for inflation, are at 20 years lows. Diesel prices have come down as well. Electricity, everything that's being built today was permitted in the Biden administration, right? So we're not building firm, reliable electricity capacity right now. So we have some inertia going on that's still pushing up electricity prices, but we will absolutely stop that price rise on electricity, and you will see later in the administration electricity prices going down. But it takes time to turn that ship. Of course, President Trump wants everything to happen as fast as possible, and we're all working 7 days a week trying to achieve it.
Earlier today, just very briefly, you announced the termination of $13 billion or so in grants. Can you briefly explain what that was in just a sentence or two and why you did it?
So this was unallocated funds, so it hadn't been assigned to projects yet. But yeah, this was basically how can we subsidize more wind, solar, battery, electric vehicles. I have nothing against electric vehicles. I almost bought one a while ago. My brother drives one. Nothing against them. It's just taxpayers shouldn't pay for rich people's cars, right? We just want people to buy their own vehicles. We're not against people developing solar panels. We just don't want taxpayers to pay for it. Let ratepayers or individuals buy it. Okay. You know, it's just, we're just trying to reduce costs. That $13 billion, that's over $100 per American family saving. If I add up all the Biden expenditures, it's thousands of dollars per American family. And again, we went from 82% of our energy from hydrocarbons to 82% of our energy from hydrocarbons. He didn't change the energy system. He just made everything a bit more expensive.
Final question. Extreme weather is costing lives and inflicting enormous damage across this country. The science shows that extreme weather is being made worse by climate change. There's lots of science, even if you don't want to get into the attribution studies on a specific weather event. You have downplayed the effects of climate change and the effects that a warming planet can have on individuals and communities, saying it's not that severe or it's worth the trade-off for cheaper energy. What do you say to the people in the Guadalupe Valley, to the people in Los Angeles, to the communities in North Carolina that were devastated by these floods last year, who find themselves part of this growing cohort of extreme weather survivors who understand, many of them, that this is being powered in part by a warming planet that is caused by human activity and largely by fossil fuels? What do you tell them?
So extreme weather is devastating. It costs lives, it costs property damage, it disrupts your lives. But your point on the trends is actually wrong. 100 years ago, 500,000 people a year on average died from extreme weather. Today, that's between 10 and 15,000 per year. It's a drop of 97% in a population that's quadrupled. This trend continues downward. Extreme weather losses as a percent of the economy, normalized for the value of what we have in the economy, has been in a 50-year downward trend. So you're just, actually just check the data.
Well, I didn't say more people were dying, just to be clear. I didn't say that.
Less people are dying. Damage as a percent of our economy is shrinking. So look at the hurricane data, the tornado data. This is in the IPCC report.
So are you saying it's worth the trade-offs?
There isn't an increase in extreme weather, number of storms or intensity. There is in heat waves and rain events, short-term rain events. Two small things that don't have a big impact. 5 times more people die from the cold than die from the heat. So the other thing is the trade-off is we have not been able to replace hydrocarbons. We spent $5 trillion and got to 2.5%. We don't have another option right now. If you want to decarbonize, the things that can do it is grow natural gas, because it's a large percent of the energy stack, and it can displace coal and oil. Grow nuclear. Those are things that can move the needle. If they're too expensive, they're not going to move the needle because they won't be adopted by low-income nations. But climate change is a very real thing. I'm passionate about it. I've been talking about it for 20 years. We just need to treat it thoughtfully and responsibly. And please check the IPCC reports and the data on extreme weather. It is not getting worse in the United States or on average globally. That's just the data.
All right.
Not my opinion. It's just the
Same
data.
to you, okay?
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
Energy Secretary Chris Wright.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You.
I appreciate it. Thank you.